This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Thank you to all who have rated and reviewed the podcast on podandchaser.com or the Apple Podcast Store. Please do subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening. Special thanks to Mike T for editing today's podcast. On to today's show. My guest today is Brette. Brette was a precocious kid who read the Bible thoroughly, and she was so intense about her Christianity that she felt like martyrdom was a goal to reach while she was in junior high. As you might imagine, there was some depression and difficulties that follow. In her young adulthood, her pastor recommended a program called Master's Commission, and she wound up dropping out of college to go there. It turned out to be a very manipulative, very intense program that, as you're about to hear, is tantamount to psychological torture. I am amazed at Brette's strength of surviving and having a sense of humor about it on this side of deconversion. Brette did overcome, and in between Master's Commission and deconversion, Brette had a bit of a spiritual but not religious phase, but she began to recognize that that too wasn't sufficient, and eventually she admitted to herself that she no longer believed. Brette tells her story in what is really a heart-wrenching tale with such a sense of humor and self-deprecation and a recognition of her humanity. I think you're really going to find some element of your own story in her telling. Here is my conversation with Brette. Brette, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I really appreciate the email you sent me. You kind of laid out your deconversion story, and you have a really interesting part of that is your connection to the Master's Commission. I'm jumping ahead here. I want to hear the rest of the story first, but let's start with just what was your faith tradition while you were growing up?
I grew up in a non-denominational kind of church, so I guess your classic, maybe evangelically kind of thing. Been a Christian since, before I can remember. My family was very religious, and but I was a very serious Christian. I was I read a lot, and I read the Bible and took that seriously, like as a young kid, which I think created a lot of cognitive dissonance at a young age, because, my family was very, we talked a lot about God's love and mercy, etc. But, in reading the Bible, there's a lot of verses in there, about God casting you aside, or people, Lord, Lord, didn't we know you? And, we did all these things for you. And then, he says, I never knew you, or things like that, that for me, I knew God was merciful, but also I knew that his mercy wasn't, necessarily endless.
Yes. I think you specifically quoted Revelations where Jesus says, you're lukewarm, so I will spit you out of my mouth. And you pointed out that, you grew up in suburbia, and, how hot or cold could you be?
Right. Right. I think I did have a lot of that, like, imposter syndrome too, where I was like, I'm not, it's never enough, I'm going to be found out, and it's God, so he can read your thoughts. And there was no way I wasn't going to be discovered. And I was terrified of hell. I was at one point utterly convinced that that's where I was going. And I spent, hours in prayer, just like begging God to like assure me that I wasn't going to hell. At one point, when I was like in like junior high, I decided that I told God that I wanted to be a martyr, and that, like, there was almost like a sense of relief when I decided that, like, oh, this is, there's nothing more you can give, this will like kind of assure me that place almost, like this is I couldn't sacrifice more. So I think that was the other part, is that the other big area of cognitive dissonance for me was there's the narrative of, we just ask Jesus into your heart, and then, that's all. Like it's all his love and his mercy. But, there's a lot of verses about following him, laying down your life for him. And so I couldn't reconcile those things as a kid. And I would have said all the right things. I knew all the right things to say. But I also read the Bible and I knew the other things.
It sounds like a couple of things are happening. One, you're honest with yourself and recognizing that you can't live up to a perfect standard. You're a maybe precocious kid, smart, right? Reading, lots more probably than
Yeah.
than your peers are, and you're trying to reconcile these irreconcilable things. What I'm amazed by is you're talking about martyrdom at what age?
I was in junior high.
Wow. Yeah, that's for serious. So
Yeah. I think, like, the other thing too, I was real, it was all about less of me, more of you, death to my ego kind of thing. So if I could just make myself as small as possible so that God could shine through me or whatever, And so at a time in my life when I really should have been getting to know myself, developing my own identity, I was really actually actively trying to kind of kill myself in a sense, and I really did put a lot of energy into that. And the other thing I would say too is the really feeling a pull between like wanting to belong, but also Christianity almost seemed to emphasize like you were doing it right if you didn't belong, like not being of the world. And so I felt this real pull between wanting to belong and yet somehow kind of also feeling that it was almost proof of my devotion the more outside I was, So that really felt like a conflict in me.
yeah, I've mentioned before that I came to Christianity in my late teens, and so I feel for people who are going through, especially like junior high. I mean, man, you are just trying to fit in and keep your head down and not stand out. And you're getting all of this, youth pastors telling you, you gotta go win the world. And, like it is, telling you to stand out like a sore thumb. And I can't imagine the stress that would put on a kid.
I did feel a lot of that stress. And I think it was like, it was the 90s, which I don't know if it's different now, but it really felt really intense. Like there was a lot of talk about end times and satanic, don't Pokemon cards are gonna bring in the devil and stuff like that. So, and then I think too, reading the Bible where it's like just this like, the New Testament and Acts, and it's all like intense story. And then the reality of Christianity is, a little different.
Yes, yes. The disparity between the promised lifefulness and the actual reality of the experience is
Right.
pretty dramatic.
Right. And I felt like, okay, well, that's my failure. Like somehow there's like some goal out there that it's because I'm not close enough to God. It's because I haven't surrendered deeply enough. I need to surrender deeper. I need to be smaller so he can be bigger and all of that. It felt like just a loop.
I'm just glad to hear you survived it. I mean, honestly, this sounds devastating.
So I went to a Christian college,
Okay.
which I think I was depressed and anxious, and I was there. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was waiting for God to show me what I was supposed to do because I was so surrendered. My life was supposed to belong to him. He was supposed to guide me, and I just had no passion for anything. I didn't know what he wanted me to do. And then my pastor heard of this program called the Master's Commission, which he was really excited about and encouraging the young people in the church to join. So I dropped out of college.
Oh no.
I made that choice, and I joined this program, which was like a young adult discipleship school. So it was in another state. I didn't know anyone. I went up there. I was staying with a family, and it was very authoritarian. It was
Mm.
very like, we had to dress a certain way. We had a sheet of paper that we had to keep track of what we did every hour of the day. We had to be in bed at a certain time. There was a lot of emphasis too on like church authority, that it was
Mm.
like God's authority. So
Yeah.
honoring our leaders meant we were honoring God, and dishonoring our leaders meant that, we were dishonoring God, and God would withdraw his protection and blessing from our lives and all that kind of thing. This church was actually very like charismatic and Pentecostal,
Okay.
like all the stuff.
Yeah. I have a picture going through my head right now of
Yeah, it's
what that would
that.
look like. Yeah.
It's that.
Yes.
So I was struggling up there. The big thing was that we were all trying to reach a breakthrough point. And looking back, like, I have no idea what that is. I don't know what that looked like. I don't know
Right.
what it was supposed to be, but it was our, vague goal the idea was, like the jars of clay thing where God breaks you open and then it's just him. So,
Mm.
and they would tailor that to us individually. So I was depressed while I was there. So I would fall asleep. Like if we had a break or something, I would just kind of, so they made a rule for me that I couldn't take naps,
Oh,
things
wow.
like that, to kind of try to push us to a breaking point, basically.
Yeah. I have to say, we've had a number of people that have gone through YWAM's DTS. So you're the first person I've had on that went through Master's Commission. And I just did a quick perusal of the Master's Commission's like frequently asked questions. And even the frequently asked questions sound super authoritarian. So on this side, obviously there's more to your story here, but on this side of things, we can look back and see this was deeply manipulative. It was absolutely abusive to put a teenager or a 20-something-year-old person through that kind of psychological torture, really. I mean, that's really what you're describing here. No matter what their intentions were, that is the experience that you went through.
Yeah, no, it absolutely was. I will say that the probably because there was the Master's Commission, and then there was Master's Commission without which is the one I went to.
Ah, okay.
Actually, I think the one you probably found is the other one.
Okay.
Which is the only one I can find when I look it up, but it's very similar. Like when I look at it and read the things about it, I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds like about the same. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So that might have been different. Yeah.
Yeah, but the same.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Yeah. No matter what they call it, it's abusive.
Yeah. Same bad idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, we spent like a lot of time each day in worship and prayer, and reading books and memorizing verses. And if you didn't do certain things, then you got punished, or you had to do extra work or whatever, things like that. But I was stressed and depressed, but I was also having like some physical like problems too while I was there. I think just all came out in my body too.
Yeah.
Like, for example, there was a time we were all out together. I would get these like ovarian cysts. So I was in a lot of pain.
Oh
And
man.
the director decided that it was because people were jealous or having bad thoughts towards me. So we
Wow.
were we were like traveling somewhere in this bus that we were all in. And he decided people needed to like confess to me in order to, break this magic spell.
Oh my
So
goodness.
I was like in pain and, just kind of trying to get through that. And one by one, people from my class were like sitting across from me and like telling me the reasons they didn't like me.
Oh wow. No way. Oh man.
Which didn't make it better.
No, it does not make it better.
Let's see. I was up there for a year and a half. The first year I was a student. The second year I came back as an intern.
Okay.
I don't know why. I don't.
Okay. I do think it's important to say here that what you've described so far is you were trying your best to live out what you understood to be the gospel, right? And
I
so
really was.
at dialed to 11, right? To do it to the fullest extent you possibly could. And all of the advice you were getting around you, say from your pastor or what have you, or just the cultural influence was, and once you get to master's commission, then it's even more intense. It's very isolated and manipulative in the way that it's trying to push you. You're just trying to do what you think is right. And even though that's the thing that's maybe causing some of the pain that you're suffering.
Yeah, it was a deeply manipulative environment. And we were spending a lot of time every day, like praying and worshiping. And I think all those things can kind of keep you in sort of that altered place of, yeah, it was intense and difficult. So I came back another year as an intern,
Mm-hmm.
and this time my brother came up as a student,
Okay.
which really I think made a huge difference for me because I didn't have any boundaries. You could do whatever you wanted to me if you said it was from God, and I would, I was just trying to be that submissive person, and but seeing my brother, is my little brother,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You feel protective? Yeah.
suddenly seeing all this happen to him, I wasn't okay with that, like I was like, oh, that was kind of my wake up call. Like, okay, this is not love. This is not healthy. I don't like it, So
Right.
that was a turning point for me when I think I was beginning to kind of question what was happening up there. It was also, I was at my just worst, I think. They decided to take everyone through deliverance during those months.
Let me just make a comment here. For listeners who grew up in any kind of charismatic environment, Pentecostal, they're going to just go, oh, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. People who grew up in Baptist, more Reformed theology, they're going to go, you people are nuts. But
Yeah.
I get it. That is the environment that I was a part of. So I totally get what you're about to describe here.
I have to say too, like the deliverance thing, like it was sort of a seductive idea because it was like, oh my God, like I am doing everything I can, but I'm still never like reaching the goal, right? I still feel like shit. And so there's this, seductive promise of deliverance, like, oh, it's not you, it's these demons, and we'll just go pray over you, and then you're going to be awesome. So that's a really like tempting, idea.
Definitely. Yeah. It's not my fault. It's the demons. Yeah.
And I was kind of like I was desperate for that to work because I was very low, and
Yeah.
I needed this to work, I needed this to be the answer because I was struggling. So they did this whole prep thing, preparing us for what to expect. We would go into this room, we might like throw up or, scream or, double over or something. And we had to spend like a week intensely preparing for it. We had to pray and fast and worship and like just really focus on, preparing for this thing because if God would do it, but only, if we had like prepared well enough.
Mm.
And then afterwards, if we didn't spend time, doing our like aftercare and praying and worshiping and stuff more, then it would all come back like 7 times worse. So
Yeah. This doesn't sound like a good deal at all.
stressful.
Yeah.
So I took this thing seriously. Like I prepared for it. And then the other thing we had to do, we had to make like a list of what we thought our demons were.
Wow.
Okay, so this is wild because how do you do that? Like I basically, what I did was, because like I went, I prayed, and then a word would pop into my head, like, fear, because sometimes I'm scared, and then I'd be like, oh, that's God telling me I have a fear demon. But then I would think, oh, no, maybe that's just me thinking that. And then I would think, oh, no, maybe that's a demon telling me that it's just me so that I won't write it down,
Yes, yes.
basically, how do I know, right? So you got to put it down because you don't want to be left with that.
Oh
So
my goodness.
I had like a page with like 2 columns of written down.
Yes, yes. I love it.
It was ridiculous. So then like, but the funniest thing is that when I finally went to go, like it was my turn, and I walked into the church, over to my chair where there's a little bucket sitting next to it in case I throw up,
Hmm.
and I hand my list to the past. There was like a pastor and 2 assistant pastors. I give them my list, and they just like look at my list and nod approvingly, like that's
This
perfectly
this checks
reasonable.
out.
I was like this lifelong Christian, like
Yeah.
trying so hard. How could that be possible? Okay, so the deliverance part was just basically like, it starts out gentle enough, like they're just kind of praying over you, and then it like ramped up pretty quick and got like pretty intense. They're like yelling and like shoving my head down and praying over me. And so at this one point, like I felt myself like kind of double over, and I
Hmm.
and I like the question popped into my head, like, am I doing this? But then I quickly shoved that aside because that was doubt. And like I was, also doubt was definitely on my list as a
Right.
demon for
Right.
sure.
For sure. Yeah.
You really got to guard against that doubt. That was like I was always guarding against doubt because
Yes,
that was
definitely.
so dangerous. But I thought it was interesting later in my life when I read about that. I'm not sure, is it idiometer idiometer effect?
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. Yeah.
It's like it's associated a lot with like Ouija boards. Like when people,
Oh yeah. Okay.
yes, the more you believe in something, the stronger that can be. Where
Right.
your body is doing something, and you really genuinely don't realize that it's you. I feel like I experienced that there.
Absolutely. I think the again back to the manipulation, but like what believers and let's say charismatic believers don't understand is that you can induce that in a human being. Playing the music, having the very intense prayer. What you're describing here is they're inducing a reaction in you, and they're not going to stop until you have some reaction, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the game. And I feel like I'm being really negative here. I do believe that those people honestly believe that was the right thing to do,
Yeah.
in the same way that you believed it was the right thing to do, and it's hindsight that you recognize that it's not. But definitely, what you've just described, the human beings are just susceptible to fooling ourselves and being fooled by those around us.
Yes, which is a very humbling realization.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know how long that went on. It felt like a really long time, and I was exhausted when it was over. But, it was a successful deliverance. We all saw the demons leaving, and I
Yeah.
seemed good after. So it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like
Right. And placebo effect, right? You do feel
placebo.
better. Like you've had a mountaintop experience and you probably walk out of there feeling lighter than air, right?
Yeah, exhausted and like, okay, yeah, that's over. And I think like it worked, and like, I'm going to be awesome now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing that happened while I was up there, and I genuinely can't remember. Like, I don't know the timeline of any of this. I don't know if this was before or after that. I really do feel like, especially like my time up there, but especially that last 6 months is in some ways just kind of a blur. Like I feel like I don't remember much of it, honestly,
Right.
but I did end up having like a public breakdown when I was up
Oh,
there.
wow.
Yeah. So we were at like a healing conference. I'm very into healing. And we were at a conference. After the conference, we were all together like in this area of the conference center, and I had this full breakdown where I was like hallucinating. It was just like a humiliating, awful experience. And afterwards, we didn't talk about it. Like, I think there was an assumption that it was like a vision or something. And the pastor was very into like visions and prophecy. And so that was like kind of a narrative that he pushed, just in the church in general.
Yeah.
So after this happened, we all went home. I went home, didn't talk to anyone about it. I was so confused about what had happened. I had no idea what happened to me,
Mm.
but it felt awful. And I was kind of mad at God because I too was like, well, I guess that was like a vision or something, but what was the point of it and why does it suck, you know? Like,
Right. Yeah. Uh,
so the next day, that happened on a Saturday. The next day was Sunday, and we were in church. And so the other part of this was the pastor did like an altar call. Again, no one had talked to me about what had happened.
okay.
And he called, he was talking about, visions again and prophecy, and called me up to the front, up to the stage with him, and he had did like this altar call where he like said that I was going to impart like a spirit of prophecy to everyone, and he just like basically put his hands on my shoulders and like guided me down this line of people who were getting like slain in the spirit and crying and stuff. And that was so upsetting. Like
Mm.
I felt, I mean, the experience had been awful. I was like deeply humiliated and confused, just really confused. And I felt like, he was using me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And also I was like, if it was a vision from God, like, don't you want to know what it is? Like, did you ask me about
Right.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
that was traumatic.
I guess
Like,
so. Yeah.
I was falling apart up there. Like I was basically like could not have been crying out for help any louder. But also it was the 90s. I don't think any of us knew about mental health in the 90s either. So maybe that
Yeah.
was part of it.
This is
Yeah.
kind of the charismatic feedback loop, though, right? Like, so you are in a very intense environment where it's being suggested to you at all times that you should experience these things. You're not getting probably enough sleep. You're probably not eating super healthy. You are keyed up, just emotionally at a constant for days and days and days, maybe months.
Yeah.
And of course you react. Of course you have some kind of physical reaction to that, a hallucination or a collapse or what have you. And then you are emotional about that. You're crying, you're weeping, and that gets interpreted as, oh, look, God's moving, and it's this
Yeah.
this vicious cycle that you were in. And again, I blame the leaders, right? Those are the people who I'm mad at, of not recognizing this is a young person who is hurting and who needs to be de-escalated, not keyed up further.
Yeah. Yeah. So those things happen. Again, I can't remember the timeline. I was obviously not in a good place at the time.
Yeah, yeah,
But I was starting to really, I think I did kind of reach a breaking point where I was like, this is not healthy. I don't know what's happening, but I was beginning to question things. And at that point, their response to that was kind of like, they further isolated me. They told me not to talk to certain people. They took away, whatever jobs I had. So I was basically kind of isolated and pushed out. And the pastor would call me to his office, and I was asking questions. Like, I was genuinely like trying to figure out stuff out, and saying, hey, I don't know about this. Like, the Bible says love means this, so maybe this isn't help. I was just challenging some of the things that were being taught. And the response was, so he was convinced that I had a like spirit of confusion.
Okay. Yeah.
So there were a couple more times in his office when he tried to deliver me. So like
Okay.
the first time he like was praying over me, and I sort of like half-heartedly doubled over again, and he was like, okay, great, that was successful.
Right.
And then like there was another time later I was in there again, and he was praying over me for the spirit of confusion again. And that time, like, I just sat there and I just felt done. Like, I'm just done. I can't do it anymore. I don't believe this. And so that was a breaking moment where I think we both knew at that point that I wasn't staying anymore. So what ended up happening is my brother and I did end up leaving, which was the most amazing feeling. I can still like
Yeah.
that drive back to California, like, is just the most, like, I felt like I was like coming alive. Like, it was just the hugest relief to finally be able to walk away. And
Mm.
I mean, I can't overstate how much like I just was so happy at that moment.
Yeah, I bet.
So I thought I was gonna just kind of go home, go back to my church and like normal life and like put that behind me. But yeah, it didn't work out that
Yeah.
way because
Okay.
once I finally gave myself that permission to start questioning things, and it just unraveled so quickly for me. Like
Yeah.
I just let myself ask any question I wanted, and nothing held together for me at that point. I couldn't believe it anymore. And then, so within those few months, I think I kind of came to a point where I was like agnostic. But one of the big parts of that, I feel like, was just that I was like, even if this God is real, this isn't love. Like,
Mm.
this isn't a loving God. None of this is love. And I couldn't believe that story anymore, So
Yeah.
in that process, I was looking for something to hold on to. Like, it just is very disorienting, everything, my whole identity was built around this, like, and so I felt like I needed something like to hold on to. And so the thing I decided was, what's the one thing I believe in, that if nothing else is true, at least like, and for me, that was love. I just decided,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, that's the thing I care about, whether God is real or not, whether any of this is real or not. That is my value and what I want to live my life based around. So
Yeah.
at that point, I kind of gave myself permission to just explore, so I started exploring like anything spiritual. I kind of had this idea that if God exists, all our world religions and all the things we do are just our different ways of trying to discover that, right? So no one has any answers, and we're just looking. So
Right.
I kind of gave myself permission just to be curious about things, which was fun because I'd never been able to do
Yeah.
that before. You have to be so guarded,
Right. Right. You don't want to let the demons in.
Yeah, let those demons in.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I did that for a while, and I will say, like, that's a whole weird world too, that metaphysical world and all that. But there was like a period where I did kind of like probably the cliche like California Earth Mama kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
But I look at that time fondly only because I think like the thing that I loved about it was that I had lived for so long like hating my body, hating myself,
Yeah.
trying not to be of the world, and like it was kind of a way for me to like just love being like a creature of the earth again, you know, and like love like my female body and like things that I didn't feel like I could do as a Christian, So
Yeah, and I think people kind of experience a delayed teenage years, right? Like, so when you're supposed to be exploring your body and your sexuality and dating and all of those things, that kind of gets denuded somehow, and then you find yourself maybe your mid-20s going, wow, I never experienced any of these things. I've got to go figure this out for myself.
I guess I didn't say before, but I actually met my husband at Master's Commission, which
Oh.
worked out surprisingly well because we're still married and I
Yeah.
really love him.
Yes. Now, did he follow along with the deconstruction, or is he still a believer? Or
Yes, actually, it's funny because I think I was kind of like a little judgy of him before because he's very like happy go lucky and just like it all went off his back like water off the duck. But now at this point in my life, like I'm jealous because
yes.
yeah, he did it way better than I do. I don't know how he got away
Yeah.
with that, but yeah, I think he always held it a little more loosely than I did, So,
Yeah.
which, yeah, I used to judge him for, and now,
I love it. I love it. Now, like, who told who? Like, did you tell him that you were having these doubts, or did he tell you? How did that work out?
I think he kind of just trailed along as I like kind of did all my exploring and everything. He didn't go to church, like he wasn't real. He was kind of like, well, I like this story of God, and but he was like supportive of whatever I was doing, and it wasn't really a big deal to him. And I think when I did like eventually realize, oh, I don't believe any of this anymore. I don't actually believe in God at all anymore. Like, he did eventually end up where I am, but I think he was just a little more attached to the story still, and but he's always been supportive either way. Like he just maybe he's more like he would have been more like a progressive Christian or something. He was very like held on to it very loosely, and so I think it drifted out more easily for him. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on a couple of things. So you're describing going through kind of a spiritual but not religious phase,
Yeah.
and maybe your husband would have stayed in a progressive Christianity. I actually think that describes the vast majority of people. I think the people who actually come to that statement of "I no longer believe in God" are fewer and far between because of what you've just described. You're giving up identity, you're giving up community, and there's so much just from a psychological point of view of feeling like we're not alone in this universe and something's taking care of me. And those are, really compelling ideas. And it's very, very hard to really analyze the reality that you're living in and recognize that, those are good sentiments, but they don't seem to be true in the real world.
Yeah, I very well could have stayed in that too, but there was a lot of pain, I think, in my experience, and that just kind of really repelled me the other way. And yeah.
For me, it was about truth, right? I wanted to know the truth. That's what led me into Christianity. And when I began to have the hints that maybe truth lay outside of Christianity, I had to go follow that, right? I needed to know. Something I say occasionally is that, true things don't deconstruct,
Yeah, right.
right? And, if your faith is susceptible to scrutiny. The problem is the faith, not the scrutiny.
Right.
And like, but what you've described is, it was my experience, was I think lots of people's experience. You feel guilty along the way. It must be my fault. It's because I doubt. It's my fault.
Yeah.
And you double down and you try and you try and you try until someday you just hit bottom. You recognize, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. When I did finally let myself just kind of drop that and was like, I don't have to live trying to make this true, trying to somehow rationalize this, I did not realize how much, I mean, it was exhausting, psychologically, emotionally exhausting trying to hold that together. And I didn't, until I finally dropped it, I had no idea everything I was putting in to try to hold that together. And it was a huge relief. Yeah. Finally just
Brett, you're telling my story.
yeah.
I, in my attempts to describe what happened to me, I say that, I was trying to keep the plates of faith spinning.
Yeah.
And when it all came crashing down, the sense of relief was such a shocking surprise. I never anticipated that that's the feeling I would have, right? As soon as I let go of trying, just like you say, of the defense, of the trying to make it rational, of trying to make it work, it was incredibly releasing. And just, you realize the fatigue you were under, right? All
Yeah.
the stress and the tense nature of trying to make it all work. And then when you let go of it, it's just an amazing feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, that's such a surprise because you just did the thing that terrified you the most,
Exactly.
Your life was going to fall apart if you did
Yeah.
that. You didn't expect it to look good. Kind of crazy.
So another part of your email was describing kind of a feeling good about learning the natural explanations of some of the spiritual experiences you've had. You hinted at that earlier, but what are some of the things that you learned on this side of deconstruction, deconversion, about the natural explanations?
Well, some of that is, like I said with the deliverance thing, and then also even just really just being able to look back and be like, oh, I was depressed and had like a
Mm,
breakdown, like, because even for a lot of years after leaving Christianity, I didn't think or talk about that experience because it made me uncomfortable. I didn't know how to interpret it. And just realizing, oh, I was just had a lot of mental health issues.
yeah, yeah. You were a young person under duress, and of course you did. Yeah.
And then there's just, like looking back now and realizing the importance I put on just basic feelings of awe, or like I would cling to the smallest things because I needed something,
Yeah.
and then what was interesting too is doing the whole like exploring other religions and new agey things and stuff is like the other thing that surprised me about all that was, oh, it's like the same, like everyone's
Yes.
doing this, it's the same experiences, just with like some different language around it, but we're all doing the same thing, like
That is a deep insight. It truly is. Like, in that, I think what, again, people that go down the road of spiritual but not religious, what they're saying is, I don't like the organization. I don't like the formality
right.
or dogma, quote unquote, quote, but they have their own dogma, right? It really is exactly the same. It's just different language.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then I think too, another helpful thing for me was learning about trauma. And I mean, my life was steeped in like shame and,
Mm-hmm.
guilt. And then it still is, it's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. That doesn't necessarily change.
no,
Yeah.
it doesn't. I mean, I think I felt so at fault for once when I was in faith, it was always my fault that I wasn't, godly enough or whatever, whatever. And then afterwards, it's like, oh God, why was I so, why did I debase myself to that level? Why did I give everything to this? Why was I so stupid? But I think it's helpful to me to understand, like, oh, that was actually, those were some traumatic things,
Yeah.
and kind of understanding where I was and why I was there, and just giving myself a little more grace around that. And
You were doing the best you could given the circumstances.
I was doing the best I could.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think even for me now, like being able to understand, okay, well, I have anxiety, I have a lot of social anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But like, it's helpful to understand, when I was young, like failure felt like, oh God, failure felt like hell, like if I fail this, I could literally burn in hell and I would deserve that, that's would be what I deserved, and those feelings don't necessarily go away, but it's helpful to recognize, why you feel that way. And that does help. So things like that, like being able to kind of trace some things to those origins and just be aware that they're there, and
Yeah.
try to make different choices, better choices.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple things there. I think, when I'm talking about secular grace, I'm also talking about how the grace you have to give to yourself, and that what I find as freedom on the other side is I can embrace my own humanity,
Yeah.
which includes all of my faults,
Yeah.
all of my weaknesses, all of my foibles, all of the things that, may have felt like were character flaws or what have you. I don't want to make it sound like I also want to learn, and grow as a human being, but in other words, they don't define me. I'm not less of a human being because I have them.
Right.
That is the human experience. We all have maybe different experiences, different issues, but we all have something.
Yeah.
And just embracing that's a part of being human has been really deeply freeing for me.
Yeah.
And then I just want to comment as well on I think the guilt about, or shame about, how could I have been fooled? How could I have believed that? That for me was really tough to get over. That was, and just recognizing again, and I'm saying this to you, Brett, and I'm also saying this to the listeners, when you're in that bubble and you're doing the best you can, you're trying to live up to the standards that's set before you, and you have all of that pressure, that social pressure, you did the best you could. And it's okay to let go of that and say, I wouldn't repeat it, but it's, but it doesn't make me a bad person because that's what happened.
Yeah. And it does, there's good things too. I mean, it's nice to be on the other side of that. And I kind of like the humbling aspect of realizing, oh, we are doing our best, and we do have really flawed thinking. We do get pulled into things really easily. We're doing our best, and we're all just kind of, exactly what you said, flawed human creatures, and that's okay. Like
okay.
Yes, I agree that like that was a very lovely thing in my life too, to realize, oh, I can just be flawed and that's fine.
Yes.
It had never been fine before, so like it was really nice to be able to be just like, oh, yeah.
And again, I think for people who are particularly introspective, and that definitely sounds like you, Christianity can be a really dangerous feedback loop. Like, as you're actually really trying, and you're thinking about your thinking, and you're thinking about your actions, and you're feeling guilt about that. And that can just get you into that feedback loop of self-loathing, really. And when you break out of that, you do have to remind yourself, hey, I don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
I might be anxious. That's okay. But like, I don't have to feel anxious about feeling anxious. I don't have to feel bad,
Right.
that I'm not the perfect model of whatever your perfect model is. What things do you find meaningful and useful for you today? Have there been particularly any books or practices or things of that nature that you find really useful now on this side?
I have listened to a lot of podcasts and other people's stories because that is very reassuring to not feel alone. Carl Sagan's Demon Haunted World was
Mm,
a helpful one for me.
so good.
And a lot for me too of just kind of almost letting go of practices because I think even for a long time I hadn't realized that I didn't believe in God anymore, that I was still kind of holding on to all this, well, I should be, living this way or that way, and just kind of melting into that. It's okay to be exactly where I am and
Mm,
doing my best here. Yeah.
I think that's awesome. Brett, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Final thoughts on the episode. You did the best you could given the circumstances. That message came through loud and clear with Brett's story. My heart breaks for the suffering that she went through, the veritable psychological torture that she experienced. I know that the people at Master's Commission probably thought they were doing the right thing, but man, this was really, really bad. It's interesting to me that Brett is the type of person that she was willing to take all that suffering for herself, but it's when she saw her brother be treated poorly that it really started to snap for her and she was able to recognize she needed to get out. I love the expression of freedom. She talks about what a great feeling it was on that drive home from Master's Commission. I think many of you listening might know what that feels like when you finally do walk away, when you give yourself permission to go and explore. That is an incredible feeling. I really appreciate that Brett has such a sense of humor and self-deprecation about this story, but it is truly heartbreaking. And we should also be angry about this, that is allowed to happen to young people in the United States or anywhere for that matter. The other thing that jumps out at me is the destructive nature of the ideology in general. If Brett, as a young child or junior high, is thinking of martyrdom as the goal, something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. And for her to feel depression and anxiety and a sense of not being good enough at that early age, it is the ideology's fault and not Brett's. And then lastly, it's interesting that we talked a little bit about some of this sounds just totally insane, especially if either A, you never were a part of a charismatic or Pentecostal tradition, or B, if you've never had a faith tradition at all. This might sound totally crazy. What is scary is how completely believable Brett's story is. I never went through that kind of suffering, but I knew that kind of thing existed. I want to thank Brette for sharing her story, for being so vulnerable, sharing such deep hurts and also such victory and overcoming. I think it's incredibly brave of you, Brett. I thank you so much for telling your story. The obvious secular grace thought of the week is that we all did the best that we could given the circumstances. We've talked a lot about the guilt that one feels after deconversion, of shame or guilt for having been fooled, for having believed things that clearly are not true. And we have to let that go. We did the best we could given the circumstances. We were in the bubble. We were in that hermetically sealed information environment where nothing disconfirming could be allowed in, and everything was self-reinforcing. and we did the best we could given the circumstances. I just want you to say that to yourself every time you start to beat yourself up about this kind of thing. It is, I almost want to use the word miracle, but it is amazing that any of us survived through this process. I hope that you experience the tremendous joy of freedom, like what Brette described leaving Master's Commission, that feeling of letting go. In her words, letting go of having to make it be true. That catharsis, that letting go is so freeing, so amazing. I hope that everyone listening can experience that in their life. As always, I've got very interesting conversations coming up. I also want to tease a cross podcast interview session with Sam and Daniel from When Belief Dies. They have interviewed me, and that interview will air on this podcast. And I am shortly going to interview Sam, and that interview will air on his podcast. And it's just really interesting in that when you are the host, you often don't get to lay out from beginning to end your ideas. And by being the interviewee, I got the opportunity to talk a lot about secular grace, what I've learned about deconversion, where my mind has been changed over the past couple of years of doing the podcast. And a subject that I was really excited to talk about is secular grief, talking about death in a real way without the euphemisms, without the spirituality that tends to minimize the reality of losing a loved one or the reality of our own mortality. We will be scheduling that so that both episodes will air at the same time. I'll let you know more about that as we get closer. Just before releasing this episode, and after I had recorded what you just heard about Sam and Daniel from When Belief Dies interviewing me, Sam let me know that he is having some issues with his laptop. Here's a quick message from Sam about his current financial need for a laptop to continue the project of When Belief Dies. If you have the available funds, please consider donating through his GoFundMe, which will be linked in the show notes.
I need your help. My computer's failing. If you're here, it's because you either know me personally, or maybe you watch or listen to the podcast each Wednesday, or read the blog on a Saturday. I'm currently running everything from a 2013 iMac that I inherited from my granddad. It served me really, really well, but it's starting to have some massive problems, and it's going to need to be decommissioned in the very near future. When I started When Belief Dies, it was just a blog, and then that quickly grew into a podcast, and now it's even grown into a YouTube channel. I've invested a lot of money, about £1,000 into the audio equipment and about £200 into other essential elements such as the domain name, hosting platforms, artwork, logos, and other equipment that I've needed to get When Belief Dies off the ground. I just don't have any money left, and I'm currently able to bring about £13 a month in from Patreon, which is really appreciated. But sadly, that's not enough. In short, I need a new computer, and one that will last me for the next 5 to 8 years, so that I can plan ahead and start to save some now for the expenses that are definitely going to be coming up in the future. You might have noticed that the videos on YouTube, although 1080p and HD, they're still patchy and blurry. This is down to my computer's processing power, and it's slowly getting worse. I've taken a lot of steps over the last few months to keep my iMac running, but it's now crashing during Zoom calls, and it's failing for most of the videos when I process them. So I need your help. I've got a GoFundMe, and that GoFundMe is designed to help me hopefully get a new computer to get over this hurdle. Would you be willing to support me on that? Would you be willing to share the GoFundMe with others online? The sad reality is, if I can't get over this hurdle, then I might have to stop the video versions of the podcast, and I might even have to stop the podcast itself, as the audio editing is also causing my iMac to crash and fail. There's a list on the GoFundMe of all the things that I'm planning to purchase with the money raised. And I hope you can see that I want to invest everything I raise directly into the best possible setup to enable When Belief Dies to last well into the future, at least from an editing perspective. As things continue to grow, I hope to be able to purchase a new camera and other items, and I hope to be able to do everything else from the regular giving and possible one-off donations as they come in, because things are growing. Anyway, no, I'll always use anything you give to directly go into supporting developing When Belief Dies. I want to thank you for listening or watching this, and thank you for supporting everything we do here on When Belief Dies. Cheers.
Time for the footnotes. The beat is called Waves from Mackay Beats. Links will be in the show notes. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can promote it on your social media. You can subscribe to it in your favorite podcast application, and you can rate and review it on podchaser.com. You can also support the podcast by clicking on the affiliate links for books on gracefulatheist.com. If you have podcast production experience and you would like to participate with the podcast, please get in touch with me. Have you gone through a faith transition and do you need to tell your story? Reach out. If you are a creator or work in the deconstruction, deconversion, or secular humanism spaces and would like to be on the podcast, just ask. If you'd like to financially support the podcast, there's links in the show notes. To find me, you can Google Graceful Atheist, you can Google Deconversion, you can Google Secular Grace, you can send me an email, gracefulatheist@gmail.com, or you can check out the website, gracefulatheist.com. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. This has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast.